Johnny, what you need?
It's just a little bit of love. A little bit of shoulder rub.
Yeah.
A little bit of shoulder rub.
See? You feel
Oh,
that?
yeah.
You feel
Oh,
that?
yeah.
All right.
All
Now,
right.
now
All right.
get excited.
As you might have seen from a previous episode, we built a quad with my man Skitzo over here. There it is. And now we've come to the important part of configuring the flight controller. Now, Mr. John Davis over here prefers RaceFlight, and today he's going to show you how to configure it.
First step, we need to bind the receiver to the radio, and to do that on Futaba is actually super awesome. You just have the radio on and press the bind button. Let's plug our USB cable in. Let's press our link button. I think I have to hold it down. That's it.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
Wait, so
Is your mind blasted too?
It actually is. Wait, so your radio was just already...
It will detect that a receiver nearby is trying to bind. But I don't know what would happen if you had more than one person with a radio on, and I don't even want to think about how that works.
So we're bind related to the receiver. What's next?
The next step is to flash the flight controller with the latest firmware. I've actually got a prompt now that I've plugged it up, and it says that I need to update the firmware, and that is what we're going to do now. By the way, you can find this on raceflight.com under the download section. You can find whatever the latest version is. That's what I recommend. In this particular case, we're going to be using build 324 because that is what's available to me right now. So now we have a progress indicator letting you know how many bytes have been written to the flight controller. Do you know what a byte is versus a bit? How many bits are in a byte?
8.
Boom! Trivia. So once you're done flashing, you are prompted with a screen that says, "Welcome, pilot. Are you ready to rip all kinds of things?" And you're like, obviously. And you're going to press continue. Then it will ask you what kind of receiver you're using. They have Tyrannus, Spectrum, or other. In this case, is going to be an other because they don't list Futaba. Then you can obviously watch a video that will show you how to properly do all the receiver stuff. But luckily, in this case, it was super fast and simple. We'll just click next on that screen. Then they want to know what VTX is set up, and I'm again going to select other because I don't have a Tramp or a Unify. Next screen, they're asking, do you want to run reverse props? I don't really care to do that because I feel like I'll get confused on which ones have reverse props or not. And essentially what that is the props are going to do exactly that. They're going to be the opposite of what you're used to, and the theory behind that is if you crash and you get chop up grass or anything like that, it will kind of sling it outward as opposed to towards the camera.
So what's normal prop direction?
Normal prop direction is counterclockwise or clockwise on the motor 1 and counterclockwise on motor 2.
Wait, this isn't motor 1 on Betaflight. This is motor 1 on
Correct.
RaceFlight?
This is motor 1 on KISS and RaceFlight.
Okay.
And then this, I guess, is motor... Yeah, Betaflight does it weird, the old school way. But this is motor 1, 2, 3, and 4. It's actually... You don't even really need to know that information on RaceFlight, though. Yeah, so these will spin clockwise. And these will spin counterclockwise, and then you do reverse props, it's exactly the other way around. So these will be clockwise and these will be counter. So anyway, on this screen we're going to select no. I don't really care about that. So we're going to carry on to the next screen. Here is the main firmware screen. It's actually labeled in a step progression, so you got step 1 through 6. We're going to start with 1, which is set up the flight controller, and this is how it's going to know what orientation the quad is and all that stuff. So I'm going to select freestyle, and I believe the reason for that is to change your default PIDs. You want help with smooth stick movements? I choose yes on this. This is again a personal preference, and that's essentially a smoothing effect that they put on the stick. Who doesn't want to fly smooth? They also want to know your quad size. Selecting this will adjust your default PIDs. I'm going to do this is a 5-inch quad, so we're going to go with that. And then of course they want you to place the quad flat on the surface, which you can see ours is. Don't touch it, and we're going to hit next. And then it wants you to place the quad on its nose, and this is how it's going to be figuring out the orientation of the flight controller. We're going to hit next, and we're done. So flight controller is finished. Now we're going to move on to the next step, which is detect receiver. You don't need to know what port your receiver is soldered to or anything. We're just going to hit next. You've got to make sure your radio's on, and we're going to hit next, and it's going to go through the scanning process. And what it's doing is trying to figure out which port on the flight controller is registering a signal from a radio. And you can see it says automatic radio detection succeeded. So now it knows what port the receiver is on. Setup radio. This is where it's going to do the endpoints of your radio as well as arming switch and things like that. Again, make sure everything's on, and it's asking me to do counter rotations with the gimbal, so that's what I'm going to do here. Then it wants me to throttle up, so I'm going to do that. It wants me to yaw right, I'm going to do that. It wants me to pitch up, and then we're going to roll right. And just by that, it knows what the channel mapping of the radio is. Set the arming switch in the disarming position. I like to use this switch, and it's already disarmed, so I'm not going to do anything. We're going to carry on to the next screen, and now it wants the arming in the arm position. So I'm going to go all the way down with that switch, and we're done. So now we've set up the radio. Next step is updating the ESC. That would be step 4. You are going to need battery power for that, and it will prompt you. So we're going to click on that, and it will say, it has a checkbox saying, I have removed the props. Very important. You don't want to plug in your battery and not know. It's just safer to do that. So that's what we're going to do. Okay, now I'm going to tell them that I have done the necessary steps. We're going to click next, and then it's going to do its magic. Currently, it's going to be updating the ESCs to the latest firmware. Okay, as you can see, the tones have changed because the later ESC firmware actually just has a different tone. It says wait until all tones are finished. That's obviously happened. We're going to hit OK. And here you're prompted with an ESC update screen that will tell you all of the information about your ESCs, like your min and max and mid throttle settings, your DMAG, the direction, all that kind of stuff. But we don't really care about that. What you want to make sure is not something, you don't want to have like a blank column. That would be bad. That means something is up with one of your ESCs. We're going to go to done. Now we're going to go to calibrate motors. Step 5. Again, we get prompted with another screen, but this says I've removed the props and I've disconnected the battery, which I need to do because my battery is still hooked up. We're going to click next. Entering motor calibration. It says plug in the battery and wait until the ESCs are finished for the first calibration tones and then press OK. So we're going to plug in our battery. Okay, we got no more tones. We're going to hit OK. All right. Now the motors are calibrated, and the final step is we are going to fix the motor direction and the idle. This is the final step, step 6. We get prompted again to remove the props and make sure we have a battery connected. Since our last step, we already have a battery connected, and I don't put props on my quads, period, when I'm doing this. So let's go to the next step, and it's going to be setting the idles to 5%. This is 5% idle. You can obviously adjust that, but I prefer 5%. All right, at this point, I'm going to go ahead and check the rotation of each of the motors, and I just do that by putting just lightly touching your hand to it. You don't want to like grab it really hard. I just feel which way it's spinning. So this one's spinning clockwise, which is correct for this setup. You want these two to be clockwise and you want these two to be counterclockwise. This one is incorrect because it's spinning clockwise. I need that one to be going the other direction. This one is spinning counterclockwise, which is wrong for this motor. And this one is spinning clockwise. So they're all wrong except this one. So now I know, moving on to the next screen, that I need to change the direction of these three. So we're being asked right now if all the motors are spinning. Yes, they are. Everything seems to be working okay. Now we get prompted with which motor is spinning currently. It is the front left motor, so we're going to select that. It's asking which motor is spinning now. We're going to be doing the front right here. And then it's asking the next motor, which is the rear right. And of course, after you select that, it will know which one is the last one. And what that is doing is essentially the motor mapping. It wants to know, in case you soldered it up differently, you can just solder it however you want. And based on that graph, it will know which one is motor 1 through motor 4. Okay, so here we are. We're prompted with the graph. This is for the motor direction. We have motor 1 through motor 4. And I remembered that motor 1 was correct, but the rest were wrong. So I'm just going to go ahead and uncheck all of these to reverse the direction of those 3 specific motors. Now we're going to start, and it's going to flash the ESCs and tell it to spin those motors the other way. Alright, so again, you're going to go through your feeling process, make sure this one's spinning clockwise. I didn't touch that, so it should be. That's correct. This one is now counter. That one's correct. This one's clockwise with that one, so these are correct. And that one is also counterclockwise. These are 2 counterclockwise. It's asking me, are all the motors spinning the correct direction? You say yes. Otherwise, you could say no and go back to that screen and redo it. And we are done. So at this point, is when you would want to set up your rates and start tuning, but I recommend starting with the default tune because it flies pretty well with that. And of course the rates are on the PID tuning page. I don't know why they're on the tuning page, but that's where they put them. I like to use 60 expo. I actually use close to the default rates. 60 expo, and then we're going to use 170 acro plus. This isn't really anything new, but essentially RaceFlight has something called acro plus. And what that value does is it's kind of the opposite of expo. So most of you know that expo kind of numbs the center stick feel, which allows you, it's just not so touchy. Where Acro Plus does the opposite, so it gets more intense towards the end of the gimbal or the end of the stick. So just think of it as the reverse of expo.
I think in Betaflight, that's called super rate, and it's similar. So I actually set up with no expo, but a high super rate, and that kind of creates an exponential curve.
It does.
Can you do that in this, or do you?
It does. Yeah, it does affect that as well. Because if you think about how the curve works, when you adjust the endpoints, it actually affects the mid stick too. So like think of your curve like kind of going like this, right? Mm-hmm. When you increase the length of those, it actually adjusts where the mid stick is. So you can actually create an expo effect.
But you like to use actual expo.
I use actual expo, yeah. So anyway, yeah, we're going to be using 400 rate, 60 expo, and 170 acro plus. That's what I'm going to start with. I may change. I may end up, because every frame is different. Sometimes frames with heavier motors on the end, I actually end up changing my rates because it has different inertia that is building up. So that's what we're going to run on this one, and we'll play with it from there. All right, hopefully you guys saw just how easy it is to set up your quad on RaceFlight. That's one of the things I like about it. It's a very, very quick process. Now we're ready to fly. Let's get to it.